Hello everyone, welcome to our event Buses on Demand, how flexible on-demand bus services can help Scotland build back fairer. I'm Lorna Finlayson, the Scotland Director of ComoUK. ComoUK is the national charity dedicated to the public benefit of shared transport. And by shared transport, I mean car share, bike share, ride share, e-scooters and demand responsive transport. And that's what today's event is focusing on. It's the first time that Como in Scotland has had an event dedicated to it, but we think this is a really increasingly important area. We think flexible bus and demand responsive transport will have a big role to play in attracting people back to public transport after the pandemic, and along with the other shared modes will help to reduce car dependency. Now is the time to think innovatively and explore how these services can help us build back fairer and aid the green recovery. We've got a fantastic lineup of speakers today. Firstly, we are going to be hearing presentations from Ranald Robertson from Hightrans, Lee Robinson from Transport for Wales, and Debbie Johnson from Pembrokeshire Action for Community Transport. We'll then have a brief Q&A, and if you want to ask a question, please just do raise your hand. You can raise your hand by going into the participants tab at the bottom and then just raising your hand that way. And I'll try and pick up as many questions as I can. We will then have some quick fire presentations from a range of demand responsive transport operators. So first up will be Sarah Foreman from Viavan, Barak Sass from Zelo, then Alex Chaplin-House from Tandem, David Canero from Padam, and Kevin Orr from Liftango. We'll then have another brief Q&A where you'll be able to put your questions to our operator panel, and then we'll be moving into breakout discussions. So we'll be putting you into smaller groups where there'll be a chance to have a more in-depth discussion. And we will just put you into those breakout groups automatically. You don't need to do anything. And we hope to do that all by 3:30 today. So quite a lot to get through. So let's get started. I'm just going to invite Ranald to come up and speak. First of all, please, Ranald.
Hi, thanks, Lorna. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Ranald.
Let's see how we get on with the sharing of the screen. Hopefully that's what I'm seeing is what everyone else is seeing, and apologies for the halo effect. We've got that rare spring sunshine appearing at the moment. So
got that, Ranald, looking good.
There we are. Well, at least masked a bit. Thanks, Lorna, and the team at ComoUK for the invitation to speak at the webinar today. Conscious of time, I will try not to spend too long, but I think it's always important for the Highlands and Islands to showcase the scenic shot and start by underlining that travelling around the Highlands and Islands should be a pleasure. And if we can work towards more people reaching their destinations sustainably, then that's an experience that we can enjoy far more than from behind the wheel of a car. I think the images on this slide are just a small example of the unique background that can be enjoyed travelling around the Highlands and Islands, whether that be the catching the ring and ride service in Tiree, having departed from MB Clansman, or indeed the internationally iconic Glenfinnan Viaduct or Tribore and Barra with the Twin Otter Landing. And I think it's really just to underline that if we can grasp the opportunity that technology offers us, we can make it so much easier for people to enjoy these experiences and get around our area. Apologies now for a little bit of statistics overload. But in preparing for today, I had a little look through some of the Scottish household statistics and noted that what we've seen for public transport in 2018 was the lowest levels of satisfaction that we had seen in some time, indeed since 2007, with just 65% of people saying they were very or fairly satisfied. And there was a marked difference in overall satisfaction between urban and rural areas, with 59.5% satisfied in the former, but just 42% in the latter. Other important public services like health and schools don't have that degree of differentiation between rural and urban. And I think it's important to maybe have that within our sights when we're talking about rural transport. Bus service kilometres in the Highlands and Islands fell by 11% in the 5 years to 2015-16. In Scotland as a whole, the fall was 5%. Not good, but you know that highlights the challenge that we've seen in the rural Scotland and the Highlands and Islands in particular. Since 2008, with the removal of ring fencing around the local authority general revenue grant, we have seen some real terms reductions in the support available, and I think the Audit Commission had that at 7.6% in the period from 2013 to 2019. And this meant that statutory services were often prioritised above discretionary spending, including mainstream transport. And again, that means that rural Scotland can bear that brunt. And between 2010 and 2019, we lost 1 in 5 subsidised bus services in Scotland. So again, it's trying to underline that point. I'm trying not to be too negative at every turn, but there is, I think, a belief on my own part that national funding schemes for local bus services can at times favour urban areas. And while we really welcome the recent introduction of the Bus Partnership Fund, with its focus being to ease the impact of congestion on local bus services, this will inevitably prioritise measures in urban areas. On a more positive front, the Scottish Government's National Transport Strategy has set out a really positive vision that commits to a transport strategy for all of Scotland, recognising the different needs and challenges the country faces, reaching out beyond the silos that exist in terms of responsibility for transport services, assets and infrastructure. If a way can be found to ensure the NTS vision is realised, then we can have real confidence that the decline in rural passenger transport need not be terminal, and the future can include more security of resources to support rural transport and offer a real alternative to the private car. While not by any means novel or new, DRT can play a really positive role in this future as we embrace the opportunities offered by today's technology for tomorrow's transport future. MAS is part of this technology future, and in Hightrans we are moving forward with our launch of the Go High MAS app that will deliver a region-wide multimodal journey planning system using real-time data for all participating mobility options. This platform will go live in June, and the benefits of the platform will extend to a wide range of sustainable and active travel modes, and participating operators will include Stagecoach Loganair, Serco Northlink, ScotRail, Enterprise Car Club, Wagon Bikes, West Coast Motors, and a large number of independent bus operators in our area. Crucially, from day one, we will include Dial M for Murray Council's award-winning DRT service, through an API integration from their shuttle DRT provider. And we anticipate adding other DRT solutions to this platform and have our fingers crossed that we might have an opportunity to do this more and more in island and remote rural areas, as we've used the opportunity of the Mass Investment Fund to bid for specific action in this space. So that's something that we're really excited to see how that one goes. But even without that, we will look to plug in additional DRT providers into our offer. Turning to the theme of today, and the DRT specifically, where fixed bus routes have changed little in decades, we are now seeing the belated emergence of technology driving change. Apps allow us to track our bus, giving greater confidence to passengers wishing to connect to their corridor. We have seen the disruptor model led by Uber, relying on app-based interaction, and this technology applied to DRT offers huge potential for change. We need to consider how we support smaller bus operators and smaller transport operators and community transport to ensure it is viable in rural and semi-rural areas. We need to use data to understand how well existing services meet the needs of their communities. And we need to learn from this analysis and be guided by it to find opportunities to replace fixed route mileage with DRT if this offers a way to improve the passenger's experience. We've seen some really good recent examples, including the Teesflex scheme that has seen communities served by limited daily fixed route services enjoy an average on-demand response time of as little as 30 minutes. Dial M for Murray has funding through the Murray Regional Growth Deal to hopefully achieve a similar impact. And we have a number of use cases emerging across the Hightrans area where we hope to see more of this type of outcome. DRT can be an important element of a multimodal and multi-vehicle trip, perhaps on a first or last 3-mile basis. We've also seen some very positive responses involving DRT to the pandemic that has engulfed us in the past year or so. Examples include Stagecoach Connect services to Mansfield Hospital staggering their service to match travel demands. More locally, and I'm pleased to say that we are working with West Coast Motors on a DRT solution that will, and NHS Highland, I must add, that will see vaccination appointment letters for people travelling to vaccination appointments in Campbelltown, Dunoon, Rothesay, Lochgilphead, Tarbert and Oban, offering access to a new bespoke service that's being established for that purpose for 12 months, that offers a glimpse into what the future could be with an opportunity to test the technology alongside the fixed route model that will still continue to operate in those areas. And the Think service in the Nestrans area has had some really good success and is now appearing, I believe, in vaccination appointment letters in the Nestrans area, offering to help people plan their travel. DRT is a great way to plug gaps in, to plug rural communities into spinal interurban bus or rail networks. And we at Hightrans are looking to do this in the Black Isle to feed into the bus network into Inverness. But perhaps being slightly negative, if we are to build back better and use DRT as part of a bus service improvement partnership scheme type model in an evolving rural model, we must not lose sight of affordability and revenue cost. The software solution to drive the transition towards DRT must be affordable from an economic efficiency perspective. That applies in the commercial model, where operators would need to deliver a better service, growing farebox revenue or reducing operating costs by more than the software costs. The same rules apply for the supported network, where additional revenue support in areas where the Transport Authority secures the services must be found to sustain the gap in the software, or indeed the same sorts of efficiencies. Either there needs to be new funding to support the software costs, or we need to embrace the NTS vision for a better alternative to the private car in every part of Scotland. And for that to happen, we probably need a bit of both for the DRT software adoption to become widespread. More efficient network operations delivering better services underpinned by increased revenue support from transport authorities. In system terms, we need to pay more to give a truly attractive alternative that ensures rural and island residents have a choice that isn't their own car, and that the ambitious target that the government has set through the climate change plan of a 20% reduction in car kilometres can be achieved in every part of Scotland by 2030. I'll stop there, just to keep myself under that 10 minutes. So sorry for straying a bit, Lorna. More than time.
Oh, that's great, Ranulph. Thank you so much. And I think there will be some people here from government, I think, and some policymakers. So hopefully they've got that message loud and clear. I'm going to just invite in, we're not going to take questions at this point. If you do want to ask a question, you can raise your hand and we'll be taking those questions when we get to the Q&A. But we're going to hear from Lee Robinson next from Transport for Wales. Lee, I'll just invite you up to speak, please.
Hi, thanks, Lorna. Hopefully you can see my screen there.
Yep.
Is that visible? Just let me try and minimize that anyway. There you go. Okay, so there we go. So I've got everything on one screen, so hopefully you'll be able to focus on the things that are on the slide while I go through. So just to set a little bit of context, so bus versus train users in Wales. So bus use is about 3 times that of train across Wales. And in terms of where we're trying to sit with our demand responsive transport or our integrated responsive travel flexi service, it sits, you know, with taxi at one end of the spectrum and train at the other end. And really we've very much in the last 12 months gone into the flexi service, that's the name of our demand responsive service, in response to the COVID pandemic, where we very much felt that there was a need for maintaining services, but also for providing confidence on some of the public transport for people knowing that they were going to get a seat and knowing that they were going to be able to maintain social distancing on that service. It's obviously a multi-occupancy service, and that service is booked via the app, via phone, or through the web. And just to give you an idea of scale, around about 70% of journeys are booked via the app. So the buses currently work in zones and obviously not on fixed routes. And we've got a combination, if you like, a combination of bus stops. So we use some of the traditional bus stops, but we also use, you know, the ones, I've forgotten the word now, but the ones where you can be, you know, picked up anywhere. The buses are smaller buses, so obviously they're able to access smaller roads, and especially in some of the urban areas where they're picking up on some quite narrow streets with parking either side, which has worked quite well, particularly in Newport. And in terms of paying for the service, you currently pay on the bus. We're looking at other ways of paying, obviously, and the payment on the bus is via all of the current common methods. Just in terms of the service as well, one of the things we found which has been really helpful is that service can be tailored to individual users. So perhaps in certain circumstances where individual passengers have got mobility issues, we have been able to alert the drivers to those situations and actually increase the accessibility that we might not otherwise have been able to do. All of the services that we currently provide are at the pilot stage, and the map in the centre there shows where those pilots currently exist. So they're spread right across Wales, from the most rural in Pembrokeshire to some of the more urban parts of Wales in Cardiff and Newport. And we are shortly about to go live with a much bigger pilot involving 9 buses in Newport, and to do another small one in Flintshire. One of the things that we are working hard to understand is, if you like, where is the sweet spot for demand responsive service in Wales? And it very much picks up on Ranald's point about, you know, where does that balance exist between you know, the social benefit from increasing access to bus services versus the cost of providing that. So we've got 3 main objectives, which are around growing passenger numbers, delivering on excellent customer service, and increasing access to bus services. And then we've agreed a very broad scope of assessment across financial, operational, economic, social and environmental parameters to try and really pin down where in Wales we want to continue to provide these services, and, if you like, where it will sit in between, say, community transport at one end of the spectrum and conventional bus on scheduled services at the other end of the spectrum. So just to give you an idea of how we've fared so far in terms of customer feedback with the pilots that we're currently running, we've got an average satisfaction score of 8.65 out of 10. And in terms of the top 3 reasons why people like the Flexi service, they're saying friendly drivers, easy booking system and a reliable service. One of the really encouraging statistics we've got is that around 9% of people who responded to the survey said that they hadn't used bus services in their area before, prior to using Flexi. So that's obviously encouraging from a decarbonisation perspective and trying to get people back to public transport and feeling confident about using public transport post the pandemic, whatever that looks like. But of course, we've also had feedback on some of the improvements that people think we could make, which is largely around longer service hours and services being available on Saturdays and Sundays. And then just to close down in terms of the next steps that we're looking to take in this area, I've already mentioned, you know, the wide ranging evaluation that we're seeking to do, which is looking at the sweet spot, if you like, in the wider public transport offer in Wales, looking to expand the shared platform. So we're talking to the Community Transport Association and some of the existing demand responsive services in Wales to say, how can we expand what we're doing so that everybody's on the same platform, which would obviously be a benefit for passengers in Wales. Also looking at how do we integrate Flexi with some of the other modes of transport, like scheduled services and the railway. And then obviously, like everybody else, trying to understand how do we feed ultra low emission vehicles into that mix over the next 5 to 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lee. Some really interesting stats actually on how Flex is working on the ground in Wales. It's great to hear that. I think it leads us quite nicely into our next presentation, also from Wales. So we've got Debbie Johnson from the Pembrokeshire Action for Community Transport. I'll just invite Debbie to come up and speak. There she is. And I'll pass over to you, Debbie.
Hello, thank you for inviting me to speak today. Let's see if we can start the slideshow. So yeah, I think this presentation does really carry on nicely from Lee's presentation, and also Ranald also made some comments about where DRT fits with community transport. So I'll hopefully share some perspectives on that from the point of view of the pilot flexi service we're running in Pembrokeshire at the minute. So in Pembrokeshire, we have a very established network of community transport services already. We've got many years experience in running flexible door-to-door services across the county. Our most established social car scheme has been running for over 40 years. We also have dial-a-ride minibus services in all of the main towns and in some of the rural areas as well. And those services typically very supportive, very targeted to people with extra needs, on a cost per passenger basis, very cost effective, run on a shoestring really, and wed within the local community. So run, organised, based within the local community, a lot of use of volunteers and community involvement and engagement in the development of the services. So a really good platform to start with, but not without its challenges. And just to pick up on some of those. So one of the main challenges with community transport is limited capacity in terms of the services that we can run. That's partly due to funding, but also due to the capacity of volunteer networks that we have. As I said, a lot of community transport services are run on a shoestring, so the office booking capability is quite limited. Historic investment in IT is also limited. So that means, for example, with our social car service, people are restricted to one journey a week. With the dial-a-ride services, they typically run 1 or 2 days a week in different areas. So the transport is there. It's an amazing, impactful service for people that use it, but it is limited. Also, our community transport services tend to have a very narrow user base, so really targeted on the people that have no other options. Our users on community transport, typically in Pembrokeshire, 80% of users are older people, age 60 and above. Very few younger people using the services, and the way that things are designed, they're really running during shopping hours, very focused services. One of the other challenges that we have, due to the restricted capacity within the office, are the length of advance bookings. So in order to manage the schedules and things, people have to book at least 24 hours in advance. Where we're using volunteers, often it's 48 hours advance notice. And really, community transport is seen by people, it has the reputation as being really the transport of last resort. So those are some of the challenges that we face. In Pembrokeshire, the Flexi pilot is very deliberately a community transport based pilot. We're testing 2 things with it. One is what does it take for a community transport operator to step up and run this kind of service? And the second is, are there any additional benefits from a community transport based approach? It's run by an organisation called Pembrokeshire Voluntary Transport that previously had been running for about 25 years in Pembrokeshire, but mainly on a very small scale, mainly group minibus hire, accessible car type services. So the Flexi Pembrokeshire service has been running since September. Obviously, it's not a great time to start a new service in the middle of a global pandemic, but nevertheless, we're already seeing some really key benefits over the traditional CT services that are running previously. First one is vastly increased service availability. So going from dial-a-ride services available maybe 2 days a week to services for people within the zone from Monday to Saturday, from 7:30 in the morning till 6:30 at night. It's a massive increase in availability of service. Lee mentioned the booking channels, so we still have phone bookings. Phone bookings are incredibly important for a lot of our former passengers that have transitioned across the Flexi service. but being able to use the app and the web to book as well is already proving very popular. The app has extra benefits as well, allowing people to manage their own booking, see more information about where the pickup point is, get real-time information about where the bus is and when it's going to pick them up, and reminders as well about their journey. And we're getting some really good feedback about that already. Another massive benefit is being able to book only 90 minutes ahead. Compared with 48 or 24 hours notice, obviously that's a massive benefit, and we're already seeing passengers take advantage of that increased flexibility. The 90 minutes deadline is our deadline that we've imposed on the service at the minute. From a software perspective, we could do it on a pure demand responsive basis if we want to go there in the future. Something else that the service does is appeal to new passengers. We're already seeing younger people using the service, and clearly Pembrokeshire is a very it's a beautiful part of the country. We have a lot of tourists here. We're expecting that 2021 is going to be an absolute bumper year. We already have established coastal bus services, which are very popular with tourists, and Flexi really has got the opportunity to contribute in this space as well. And we're anticipating, particularly with the app, we're looking at combining the app with information about the other services that tourists can use in the area as well. So we're expecting that that's a real good opportunity for growth of the service, and also a way potentially to keep this service viable for everybody that needs it, locals and tourists alike. There's also opportunities for potentially for cost-effective community group travel. So whereas a lot of community groups in our area were previously hiring buses at expense, where they're older people's groups, so dementia groups, the Stroke Association, people like that, potentially they can build some of their group travel into the Flexi service, and if everybody's a bus pass holder, then they can all travel free, and that's a benefit to the community group, to the Flexi bus obviously, and to the service as well. So lots of kind of opportunities there. Before I finish, just want to highlight a few new challenges and things to think about really as things go forward. Something that Lee touched on is how do we ensure that we still provide the support that's needed for those with extra travel needs. So something that we have quite quickly, and we've spent a lot of time doing with the Flexi Pembrokeshire service, is making sure that people with extra mobility issues are still supported by the service. And if that means putting in place extra mobility assessments, and we actually have a parallel service, so those people that need a door-to-door pickup, not from nearby virtual bus stops, can have that, and can have that extra level of access that they need. But it is really important to make sure that we're still thinking about that. And it's not just about enabling people to use the bus service, it's about what support do they need at the other end of their journey when they're out and about in town as well. And we have some other projects with Impacto that support with that. It's also been a real challenge for a small rural community minibus operator to step up onto this platform, but having said that, they've absolutely risen to the challenge, and I think they are already showing that community transport operator can deliver a service in this space. It's not just something that needs to be taken over by other operators, and I think probably in many rural areas the number of bus operators that are available to operate services like this may be quite limited. So it's a good opportunity for community transport, and a big learning curve, but something that they're rising to the challenge and doing very well. Another thing to think about in the future is really, are there still transport needs that can't be met? What is the future role for more traditional community transport services? So are there people that need a lot of support with their journeys when they're out and about, that perhaps are still going to need more of a social car service, bespoke support? Are there hours and times where it's more marginal to provide a DRT service, from a financial perspective, where there's still going to be a need for community transport, and how can we build that in? And then linked to what Lee mentioned in his presentation, what are the opportunities for community transport to make use of this new infrastructure that Transport for Wales is investing in, both in terms of the technology and also in terms of the call centres potentially? You know, can that support some of the shoestring operations that we're running community transport under at the minute, and expand the services that are available as well? So just a few thoughts there about community transport and how it plays in the DRT space.
Thank you very much, Debbie, for that. There's just so much potential, I think, in the community transport world. It's great to hear your experiences of how it's actually working there. I'm going to can I invite Lee and Ranald just to come back on, turn their videos on. And at this point, I'd just like to open up for any questions to either Ranald, Lee or Debbie. And just to say also, Debbie has to go, so she can't be here in the breakout. So if you do have any burning questions for Debbie, now is your opportunity to do that. And just if anyone wants to just raise their hand and let me know if you want to come in with a question.
Lorna, there's some questions in the messages as well. I responded to one there about costs. So
yeah, that was one I was gonna mention, that one, Lee, actually. So the question there, I think it's from Lucy, was asking about how the DRT services compare to fixed route services cost-wise, which is going to be the question in everyone's lips, really. So I'll throw that out to each of you, maybe more important for Lee and Ranald potentially.
So I've partially put a response in there. And in terms of, if you look at the base costs in terms of fuel, bus, driver, etc., then, you know, broadly speaking, they're comparable with a scheduled service. There are some fixed costs in the background that we've got, you know, around the call center and the app. The challenge, of course, comes when you start comparing cost per passenger, because you simply, you know, if you get 70 passengers on a bus versus 16, it's always going to be a lower cost per passenger on those mass transit routes. But I would argue, and continue to argue, that's not really comparing apples and apples. And that's why, with some of the work we're trying to do and evaluate the service, is trying to work out where is the sweet spot for this service, because it will never compete with you know, something that's running every 15 minutes down a bus lane. That's not what it's there to do.
Yeah, if I can maybe just amplify the point that Lee made there. I think in terms of the fare cost, one wouldn't expect the cost to be any different in terms of what the passenger's paying. That's what you would hope to be the case. These shouldn't be a premium service. And, you know, part of really that point around, you know, how these could potentially re-energize connectivity for areas that aren't on that 15-minute headway bus service at the moment, but actually could maybe plug into that. I think there's a really, if we can get it right, and that experience has to include the interchange itself as well. You know, we need to get that right too. But yes, you know, what we really want is to make it as easy as possible and as cost effective as possible, so that it's a much better option. So yeah, I don't think we're going to replace the 70 people on a double-decker bus, but actually it's to complement the 70 people on the double-decker bus, yeah, and potentially to rework how the fixed bus route network currently works, so we can maybe have more express working in the fixed bus routes with more people using those services and then serving other areas. So I think I touched on the Black Isle as an example, but for me, it's not necessarily about taking people from, you know, I'm trying to think of Ardross in Ross-shire into Inverness, or indeed into Dingwall. It might be taking people from Ardross into Tain, and then they remode onto the Stagecoach X99 service and carry on to Inverness, or the train. So it's to make the journey much more efficient and effective. And just the point around, I think there was a point in the chat about funding for ultra low carbon vehicles as well. And just to say, I touched on, you know, how funding streams can currently help more in urban areas than rural areas, and I think the same point possibly applies, where it might help more for a big bus working than a small vehicle as well. And we do need to find a route to ultra low emission for all types of transport operation. And at the moment, we've seen from the most recent round of SULEBS awards in Scotland, Orkney Islands Council secured budget that then decided not to draw that down, and I think a similar experience happened in Wales as well. So we do need to ensure that the funding mechanisms are appropriate and work in areas where the commercial fare box can't easily drive the decision, and BSOG isn't quite enough to get there as well. So we do need to ensure that the interventions we make can happen everywhere.
Thank you, Ranald. Debbie, do you want to come in on that as well?
Yeah, I mean, well, obviously to echo what Lee and Ranald have said about the cost per passenger being a different different metric. I mean, we don't have any 70-seater double-decker buses in Pembrokeshire anyway, so we're starting from a very kind of a different base in rural areas. But from a community transport perspective, when we try and think about the value of community transport, it's often not just in terms of the transport costs, it's about the wider impact and benefits of those services, particularly around kind of health and well-being and some of those areas. So kind of just thinking about everything in pure economic terms is sometimes missing the point with some of these more socially necessary services.
Oh, that's great, Debbie. Thanks. A very good point there as well. Thank you, folks. We are going to go into the next section of presentations. So we'll just move into that. If you guys can turn your camera off now. Thank you very much for that. There'll be opportunities to ask more questions of these guys in the breakout discussions as well. But we are going to move into our operator section now. So we're going to have some quick fire presentations from demand responsive transport operators, starting with Sarah from Via Van. So I'm going to ask Sarah to come on and present. That's brilliant. Thank you, Sarah.
Great. Thanks very much, Lorna. Hopefully folks can see my screen. Great. Lovely. So my name is Sarah Foreman. I'm part of the team at Via. And Via is an organization that provides technology and operations for a really wide range of transport use cases. We've already heard some really great detail from Debbie and Lee about the Flexi service, which is one of the on-demand bus services that Via's technology powers. But equally, we work with about 200 different partners around the world on not just on-demand buses, but also home to school transport, non-emergency medical transport, and really all sorts of situations where people need to think about ways to move community members in a really safe, efficient, sustainable, and accessible way. And so what you see up on slides here are just a few examples of the different partnerships we have with different operators, community transport providers, and local authorities in the UK. In the interest of time, I won't talk about all of these, but I did want to dive into at least one or two examples of some really interesting ways that some of our partners are using DRT to navigate some of the really challenging moments coming out of COVID-19. One of those, if we can switch, is Milton Keynes Council down in England. And the core challenge that we're helping them with is unfortunately one that's pretty common across the UK at the moment. But in the wake of COVID-19, they saw patronage on their supported bus services drop precipitously, so 90–95% in some cases, which meant that their subsidy per head skyrocketed at the same time that their revenue streams, which primarily came from parking in the city centre, really dried up. And they brought in Via and our local UK team to help them think through how they could continue to maintain service that, as Debbie said, is really crucial for all sorts of reasons, while addressing some of the budget challenges they saw. And we ended up working with them to simulate a number of different setups and options for their overall transport network, and found that by replacing their subsidized fixed routes of the DRT service, they could maintain full service accessibility, but make pretty massive savings, cutting about $1.5 million off of $3 million in annual subsidy. That resonated, and the council is now pursuing that process and has already started launching the MK Connect service, which is a fully demand responsive service. Will again replace all of those different subsidized routes starting in about a week in April, and is already launched for a small portion of the network. It's a fully accessible service. Folks can access it by phone and by app. I think a couple of things that are really interesting on this are certainly the cost savings that it's going to bring, but also the ways that it integrates in with the commercial network. So that if a passenger makes a request for a journey that can be covered by a fixed route bus, we won't send DRT to them. Instead, we'll encourage them to take that fixed route bus, which I think really speaks to Ranald's point about the need to connect these services to the overall network. It's also operating with an accessible fleet that's using primarily electric vehicles. So it's doing a nice double duty of helping Milton Keynes address cost challenges, maintain service accessibility, and also really double down on their sustainability goals. So that's, I think, one very interesting example. I'm not sure we'll have time to go through too much more of a second, but another I just wanted to call out really briefly is some work we're doing with Stagecoach in the Tees Valley to think about using on-demand bus services to cover areas actually previously didn't have public transport access. We launched the Tees Flex service in February of last year, bringing this on-demand bus service to a number of areas across the Tees Valley that had seen their bus services cut back significantly over time. It's been hugely successful over the last 12 months, doing more than 45,000 journeys, I think covering all sorts of use cases from COVID vaccination to getting to and from work. I think really shows again ways that DRT can help bring public transport to places that otherwise just might not be able to have it, given some of the challenges of serving especially rural communities. So I'll pause there, but would love to talk about any more details on either of these or anything else in the breakouts. Thanks, Lorna.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you for that, right on time. I'm going to pass over to Barak Sass from Zillow, please. Just invite Barak to come up.
I'm Barak. I'm from Zillow, the smart bus platform for organizations. Okay. Our goal is to solve commute challenges. Think of us as a demand responsive solution for corporates and schools and universities, educational institutes. Today, we are going to focus on the corporate side of our business. And we are here to solve a number of pain points for the organization, everything that has to do with transportation. How do I recruit and how do I retain the best people? How do I provide safe transportation? Obviously, everything that's COVID related, social distancing, via the mobile app or sanitation procedures, but also ensuring that employees, workers have the ability to travel back and forth to work at any time of the day, 24/7, even at 4:30 in the morning. How do I ensure that I am green enough? So one, promoting the use of electric buses and electric coaches. We usually work with everything from a Mercedes Sprinter to a double-decker. And there's also the Zillow Green Initiative, where we help coach operators electrify their fleet. And how do I do it? Only when necessary. So our solution is geared toward peak time only solution. So we wouldn't be straining the local congestion, wouldn't be having vehicles running around with unnecessary emissions. And the way that we do it is technology and operational service combined. So we have a routing algorithm that helps us map the most efficient routes. We then have a driver and rider mobile applications that helps us service those routes, and a one-stop shop solution. We take care of all of the operational procedures, subcontracting coach operators, 24/7 customer service, sharing data with our partners, obviously GDPR compliant, but sharing data. And we like to measure our impact on one, the improved access to employment. There's a ton of research about access to employment, which is what we focus on the corporate commute space. We found out that there is times 13.5 more chance of you getting a job if you have good access to transportation. In one of the organizations that we worked with, we had a survey, found out that 44% of employees were willing to give up their second car because of the reliable Zillow service. So we're very proud of that, our ability to help access to employment and on our impact to the environment. This is a random example from a random business that we work with, and we're able to show them how many CO2 are we saving, how many is that in years of a tree or trees planted, and how much is that in the social costs that we save because of the reduction in CO2 emissions. This is a case study, a customer story of ours. The client is Amazon Buffgate. That's the H1 located in Buffgate. Basically coming to us because of a mediocre service they had. wanted a more flexible and reliable door-to-door service for their employees' distribution center. We had 26 daily services door-to-door with 3,600 riders each month. And I guess that the points that I would like to highlight are what's highlighted in the quote from the operations manager. It's the ability to be flexible, to optimize routes, to have a very quick response, again, with our customer service, and a very simple app to use. And I think that's one of our key strengths, is coming in and offering a very simple solution. And lastly, there was a lot of talk about costs. And I think I want to mention on that point that we enable a public-private partnership, mixing the expenses between the corporate that we work with and the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Barak. Sorry, I had to come in there, just getting over time. Thank you for that. I'm going to ask Alex from Tandem just to come up and present, please.
Hi everyone. I do have some shiny slides, but I haven't brought them with me today, so you'll have to bear with my face for the next 3 minutes. Tandem specialises in creating new transport options for small towns and more rural areas, and we're doing that by building a unique form of DRT, and that sees us partner with existing local taxi and minibus companies, so existing firms who are already rooted in your communities, and turning those vehicles into this new form of DRT. So like some of the other DRT systems you have heard about and you will hear about, passengers can book through an app or on a phone, fares are fixed, like with traditional buses, so even if there's only one person on board, still the same cost to a passenger. Our technology pulls those passengers together, and then the really unique piece, we think, is that that journey is then delivered by an existing local taxi company. So if only in a particular rural area at 11 a.m. only 3 people need to travel, then we can send a 4-seater vehicle out. If 6 people are traveling, we can send an 8-seater local taxi out. If consistently there are larger volumes, we can start to block book minibuses. But crucially, we're not block booking most of the time. And so in rural areas, there are obviously lots of times of the day where nobody wants to book. And so with our system, I think we are unique in this in the DRT world. If nobody books, 0 costs are incurred with our services because we're only booking vehicles when they're required. To date, we've mostly been doing that in partnership with private sector employers like Royal Mail, Manpower, Reed, a bit like Barak talked about, getting workers to particular out-of-town sites that are difficult to access with traditional public transport. But we've just signed our first partnership with a local authority, bringing this model into the formal public transport network for the first time. So one of the other local authorities we're talking to at the moment is now spending close to £150, this is partly COVID driven, close to £150 per passenger per journey, subsidising some of their rural bus services. You can see quite quickly how we could, not that we will do this, send a single taxi to every single passenger and save the local authority over £100 per passenger. Now, obviously, we will pool those passengers together and actually therefore save even more money and be as green as possible. But you hopefully can start to see how local taxis could play that role locally. Our services tend to operate on what we call a dynamic schedule. So they're not always fully on demand, and we're trying to encourage, again, in more rural areas, people to travel at the same time. And then the last thing to note is that we're also talking to some bus operators now about a blended model, whereby during peak hours, there is enough demand for there to be a traditional bus service. And outside of those times, we'll still offer accessibility to all members of the community with the demand responsive taxis. Thanks.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you very much for that. Right bang on time as well. I am now going to ask David Canaro from Padam just to come up and present, please.
Hi there, thanks Lorna. So I'll just get mine. So thank you very much for inviting Padam Mobility here. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go through 2 things. One is a very brief intro into Padam Mobility, and then the second is to look at our project with Lincolnshire County Council that we have launched this year. So something that isn't necessarily well known in the UK, we were one of the pioneers of DRT. So in 2016, we launched the Slide Bristol service with our ATP dev. Today, we have over 57 live projects, predominantly in Europe, but also in North America and also in Asia. Lincolnshire and Bristol is mentioned, but we also have in France some regional deals. So where, for example, we provide the DRT for the whole of the Paris region. So that's a service with 720,000 journeys per year, covers 8 operators and is broken down into 25 different DRT areas. We also do that in rural places, so Brittany, which is a very rural regional project we have, and Pays de la Loire. One interesting bit on Pays de la Loire, on the cost of DRT, we worked with them to drive it down from 20 euros a trip to 8 euros a trip. We couldn't do better because at 8 euros a trip, the metrics mean that it flips over to a fixed line service. But I thought that might be of interest to talk about afterwards. We have projects live with pure 100% electric vehicles, so for the metropolitan area of Strasbourg. And we also have mass integrations in Canada, in the north of France, in Lille, and also with Siemens and Hakon. We come at DRT very much from a public transport perspective. Our backers, our investors, are industry players, so Siemens and Setec. As I said, a public transport industry specialist, and we work with authorities and operators in many different countries. Our offering is, just change the slide. Our offering is broken down into 2 main areas. So one is a platform, a core DRT platform, which manages the operations, automatizes the operations, et cetera, and then we have a suite of applications, both web and mobile for the users, mobile for drivers, and also call center bookings application on the web for call centers, and an operator's interface where you can intervene when required. Well, you can visualize the service, but also intervene when something urgent comes up, such as a vehicle breaking down. Of course, most of the operations are automatized, so generally there's not a reason to intervene. Going into a rural case study. So we've launched this year with Call Connect in Lincolnshire with the County Council. Call Connect is one of the oldest DRT services in the UK, and it's very rural. So it's one of the most sparsely populated counties in England. A third of people live in small villages under 3,000 inhabitants. And it's a very difficult environment to provide public transport. So this was the challenge. The overall Call Connect, so this is the historical version, the analog version, if you like. So 300,000 people are transported annually. So it's a big service. And that's done via, up to date, has been done via phone calls and emails. And our role has been to digitalize it. So what they were looking for is a better route dispatch. So this is about automatizing and increasing operational efficiency, much better customer experience, which is delivered via the digital products, and also to attract younger people. So this was an important part of this. Gainsborough, as well as being part of a sparsely populated county, is classed as a deprived area in the region, with very high rates of child poverty. So on this project, we had a very big onus on social economic policy and being able to allow people to move about. So where this is going, so the project is going to grow. There's going to be a second phase. We're going to add peri-urban parts to the DRT project, so 2 more zones are coming in, more vehicles, and based on the success of the first round of, or the first part of the project, we're growing this and working with Lincolnshire County Council on their DRT needs. That's it.
Oh, right on time. Thank you, David. Thank you very much for that. And just finally in this section, I'm going to ask Kevin from Liftango to present, please.
Hi, everybody.
Thanks, Kevin.
Now. Hopefully you can see. Thanks, Lorna. So I'm Kevin Orr. I'm the CEO of Liftango. Who are we? We are technology partners that provide DRT solutions to cities, councils, bus operators, and community transport. We've been doing this a fair while now, roughly 4 years, just on the other side of the world. We work across 100 shared transport networks with 3 office locations in Australia, North America, and just as of last year, launched in the UK. And just some of our use cases, I guess, around the world, so a couple in Asia as of early this year as well in Sweden. So what is DRT in our view? DRT is about taking existing assets that are existing in the community, potentially poorly patronized or not used efficiently, and digitalizing them to get more out of them, sweat the asset essentially. So we work across public transport with cities, councils, and operators, corporate transport with corporates directly, and the community transport sector as well. And sometimes we actually work across with one system across those different potential use cases as well. We've been doing this a while, so we work up front with our clients quite closely on simulations. The value of simulating a service before launch, we believe is the key to success. So we work very closely to understand what is the best system design, best configuration, if it's door-to-door, virtual bus stop, or zone-to-zone, for example. We're able to implement our solution, and we offer call center phone bookings alongside mobile app and website bookings. And then we assist with the management and implementation of that. So project management using our playbooks, alongside, I guess, providing previous marketing materials that we've leveraged in the past and can save costs on moving forward. So I'm just going to spend the rest of the time talking about some of our more rural case studies around the world. First one being our oldest project called Coast Connect in Australia. This region here is called Woi Woi. It was where Spike Milligan's parents lived, and he described it as the only above ground cemetery he had ever been to in the world. So it speaks to the demographics, I suppose, of the region. This project was actually with Community Transport, the local provider, Community Transport. They used 5 of their vehicles for a commuter service on top of providing their existing core service around the community as well. So they were able to unlock a new revenue source, provide more trips around the community with existing assets that were already available. So saved a lot of money from the council's report. This is a more recent project that we launched in Michigan in the USA. It's called BC Go up in Battle Creek region. Less rural, it's more of a 50 square mile region. We've got more rural areas than that. It's 3 vehicles and partnering again with the local authority and the transit agency there. So that's only 1 month old now. And the one I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about is our project in the North Lincolnshire region. It seems like Lincolnshire is doing a lot in the DRT space. So this launched in August last year. It covers the whole of North Lincolnshire, so a 515 square mile region. It was a mixture of services before, so they had a community transport service. It was called ComoUK, but it was quite siloed up in the northeast of the zone. They also had a poorly patronized fixed bus route towards the sort of south of the zone. So instead of funding both of those separately, they decided to launch the Just Go service using the existing funds that they'd had from that. So now we offer a kind of mix of community transport and commercial DRT services around the whole region. We had to solve a lot of problems, I suppose, with launching in such a large geographic area. None more difficult than trying to avoid convergence into more popular areas of the zone. So we have a number of features and nice designs for preventing that. And similarly, trying to or avoiding having to compete with the existing fixed route services that are already in the region. So we implemented a number of features there that mean we actually promote the existing fixed route services in the region through the app, so people can actually get from that and hear about that service alongside the DRT service. And this is a Scunthorpe region that's very well connected, so we actually get people into the zone or out of the zone, but we don't transport people in and around that zone. So it works in with the existing infrastructure that was already there. Very well connected.
Thank you, Kevin. Sorry, I'm going to have to just interrupt there because we're just out of time. But thank you so much for that presentation and showing us the different case studies. That was great. Thank you. I'm now going to, if I could ask all the operators just to turn their cameras back on, and I'm just going to throw some questions out to the floor. If anybody would like to ask a question, please just raise your hand at this stage. I did see one come through in the chat though, and it was actually specifically for Barak. Somebody, I think it was Lucy, had asked if you could repeat the statistics on the readiness of giving up the second car that you mentioned in your presentation, if you've got that to hand.
Yeah. So I mean, there's as I said, there's a lot of research, and I'm happy to share. We had a survey in an organization that we worked with. This was pre-COVID. 44% said they were willing to give up their second car just because of being introduced to a door-to-door commute solution. So that's the number, 44.
44, there you have it. Thank you very much. Everyone's been very shy today. Has anyone got, I see Roy got his hand up actually. Roy, do you want to come in and ask a quick question for our panel?
Yeah, I maybe I should introduce myself first. My name is Roy Cairns. I'm a bus compliance officer with bus users in Scotland, and I'm actually representing my director, Greg Mackay, and very much we champion the rights of the bus user. So it was actually a point Debbie mentioned, and she mentioned 2 or 3 things that were quite relevant to some of my questions. First one was, given some groups, including the elderly, the disabled, or otherwise disadvantaged, that may ultimately utilise and particularly benefit from DRT, while at the same time there's an increase in dependence on the digital world. The question is, what measures might be undertaken to ensure many who would greatly benefit from the advantages are not excluded?
Thank you, Roy, for that. We'll open that up to the panel, and I think Debbie is still here as well, but we'll start off with the panel here. If anybody wants to come in on Roy's question, that'd be great.
I'd be happy to kick us off, and I'm sure others will have things to add. But I think it's a crucial question. I think part of really what has to go into the initial design of a service to make sure it's going to work for as many people as possible and how it's set up. And so couldn't agree more. And I think a few different elements of that, at least for our team at VIA and the way that we work with our partners, comes down to first how we set up the service. You know, what areas are we covering? Are we making sure that we're covering the use cases that are going to be relevant for everybody? How we think about having door-to-door service or curb-to-curb service or whitelist points, bus stops that are virtual bus stops, as folks have talked about, and even breaking that down for different passengers. So some passengers who are comfortable walking or wheeling a long distance do so. Those who aren't able to don't. But that core design, I think another element of this is really the apps themselves and the technology that we use. We have things like WCAG 2.0 compliance that basically means we have lots of inbuilt features that let people use voice over technology, inbuilt features like increased font size or contrast. All those sorts of things can help make sure lots of people can use the technology. And I think a third element is also having non-digital options for those that aren't going to want to use them. So we talked a lot about apps, but for us, there's also an online web portal that folks can use if they say have a desktop at home but don't have a smartphone. And then being able to call in is also a crucial lifeline, as I think Debbie mentioned a few times, that option for folks to be able to use a more comfortable method is also crucial. So those are a few starting points.
What we're finding there, particularly in a couple of areas we've looked at in Scotland, where the call, if you want the phone, there's obviously a 24 hours notice. Whereas in Stirling, for example, they can only give 2 hours notice. They only need to give 2 hours notice if they're doing it online. But just something else that Debbie picked up on, it's obviously when you talk about apps, it's especially relevant there. It's will it be advantageous to promote DRT much more widely to the young, given the proposed legislation, for example, to introduce free travel for all under 19 Scotland within the 2021-2022 financial year? Because there are so many young people. I discovered that my own two sons, who do a lot of climbing and things, they had no knowledge at all of DRT. And whereas they could make huge use of this, so obviously there's a great window of opportunity there to feed this out to younger people as well.
Roy, if I could just add in, I think that's some of the segments that we see the most uptake in is in the youth.
Yeah.
Obviously catering for the older demographic who want, I guess, a more like a community transport service is key as well. And a lot of people with disabilities obviously can't walk to the bus stop and can't do things like that. So you need to cater for them differently to how you would commercial people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So a lot of that does get done in the technology as much as it can do. And then other areas are done in the design of services, like Sarah sort of mentioned at the start. But there is a way, I guess, to kind of have a two-tier. It's almost a two-tier system with community transport and public transport kind of coming together, but delivered through the same system and the same service, which is what Just Go is essentially doing.
And what I found interesting as well was the scope of, obviously, I think Debbie mentioned it also, it was the scope of opening up to tourism. I mean, that's, you know, the more people use this, the cheaper it becomes. So it's, yeah.
Thank you, Roy. I think you're just hitting you're getting that absolutely right there, that there is so much potential and opportunity across the board. And actually, I think what I'd like to do is move us into the breakout discussions, because I feel that, you know, it'd be good to get into some of these issues in smaller groups. As I said at the start, our operators will be split up into the groups, so you can continue to ask questions or chat to the other participants about challenges or any kind of areas of opportunity. So we'll do that. I'll invite Dave, our tech support here, to put us into some breakout rooms. I'll just take a few seconds to do that. Thanks everybody. Hope you enjoyed the breakout session. We had a very lively discussion in ours about the opportunities and some really interesting comments about where DRT could potentially fill some of those gaps. It's really interesting stuff. I just want to thank all of our speakers again today, and just thank you all for joining us as well. We hope that you found this session useful. It has been great to hear about some of those projects that are happening in Scotland and the Highlands and Islands and in Wales and in the rest of the UK. I think that it's definitely, it's quite a new topic for Como, but we found that we do think that DRT and flexible bus have a big role to play going forward, getting people back into public transport. And as I said earlier, working alongside the other shared modes and trying to really attract people out of the private car. That's the big challenge, and it's something that I think we'll be returning to over the coming weeks, and certainly will be our focus over the next 12 months. We are going to have a full programme of events starting again in April in the new financial year, so we hope you'll be able to come along to some of those in our next sessions, and we will circulate the details of those. So just thank you again for attending, and thank you very much to our speakers. Thank you so much.